Welcome to this session on rollout of National Voluntary Guidelines. As you are all aware, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, July 2011, has brought out guidelines for responsible business practices. These guidelines consist of how business has to govern itself, how it has to run ethically, and how it has to deal with corruption, and also how it will have to contribute to the employees' welfare, customer value, and to the suppliers, and also to the communities. This, according to Ministry of Corporate Affairs and according to the best practices globally, constitutes the business responsibility. The issue is, the guidelines of course goes further and tells us about how to implement these guidelines within an organization, how to embed these guidelines within possibly business excellence systems within the organizations or total quality management systems within the organizations. Our panel today, consisting of advocacy organizations and thought leaders and academia, and also some representatives from the business, is going to discuss what are these NVGs, try to understand further the NVGs, and these NVGs and the good responsible business practices, how do I implement, how do I deploy within the organizations, what capacity do I need to build within the organization, and what capacity the government and the stakeholders have to build in themselves so that they can watch and drive the businesses to follow the best responsible business practices. Let us all join and enjoy these deliberations further.
I'm sure all of you are here with the intention and the objective that this is the most important session, as Dr. Rambabu mentioned, of how to actually look at imbibing the National Voluntary Guidelines, which is demonstrating leadership of the Government of India across the globe. And therefore, National Voluntary Guidelines, which was developed through the partnership of the German International Cooperation and the Indian Institute of Company Affairs, within which is a think tank body under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, took up this bold step of kind of going through the country, engaging with not only international partners like Global Reporting Initiative, but also other partners across India and institutions and stakeholders, spanning businesses, spanning civil societies, spanning advisory groups, spanning academicians. And therefore today's panel, you will see that we have got two panelists from the Indian business representing the public sector and the private sector. We have Dr. Kulkarni from the private sector. We have Mr. Chakravarti from the private sector enterprise, public sector enterprise. Then we have an academician, Dr. Shirish Sangle, and we have a civil society organization, Mr. Chakma here, and we have an advisory representative with Ms. Betsy Vincent. So with that, you see that the panelist is really multi-stakeholder in nature. I would like to provide a little bit of background to this session, that what is the real proposition of this National Voluntary Guidelines when we talk about environment, economic, social responsibilities. And someone in the last session, before we broke for lunch, brought out a very interesting question about the difference between, or this watertight outlook of looking or treating CSR and sustainable development in a different manner, both within the organization or outside the organization. So if we think back on that question and look back what has really happened for the last 10, 12 years, we see that a lot of change has happened for the last 18 months to 2 years in India. And now I think sustainability, the term sustainability has become very common to everyone. Initially, I think when the term was coined by someone, in the Western world, people were talking about triple bottom line responsibilities, environment, economic and social. And there were all these conferences and seminars discussing, why do we need to actually talk about triple bottom line? What is the business case of sustainability? Why do we need to talk about environment, social and economic performances all together? So the main question really coming back to to us is India has now taken this bold step and we have a national framework, but there are many, many organizations even in India who did not wait for this legal, the government initiative to, tell them what to do about environmental and social aspects in a comprehensive and holistic manner, and also include governance in that. So we do see a club really of elite companies and organizations who have understood this, and there was this voluntary approach of many, organizations such as the Tata Steel for many years. Mr. R.P. Sharma was one of them, the pioneers to take this through. Dr. Rambabu was also involved, I remember, taking this through across so many organizations. But these were all voluntary things, and I think this is a moment when now we have the National Voluntary Guidelines launched in July 2011. Everyone is waiting with a little bit of skepticism as to how this should be rolled out. The main partners, as Dr. Rambabu mentioned, as the German International Cooperation and the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs, the focus is therefore coming on, if we have to imbibe this Indian framework, how do we actually do that? What are the capacity building needs, and which are the other stakeholders that needs to come in? So the basic question therefore is about, if we talk about environment, economic and social dimensions of any organization, we actually question ourselves with the trust architecture. And I would like to leave this with you, that the trust architecture, if you kind of visualize it in a triangle, the below, the x-axis of the triangle is actually about what is it. So the what is about profit with a purpose or profit without a purpose. Yeah? That's the basic question. And I think whether it's a public sector enterprise or a private sector enterprise, the businesses are here not to work in isolation but become the contributor to a problem that the society faces. And therefore, the purpose is very well integrated with the profit, but it has to be demonstrated somewhere. Somewhere the purpose becomes a difficult situation and a proposition, not only for the business to accept, but also for the society. The other aspect is, then how do we do this? And therefore, the how becomes the transparency aspect of this trust architecture, which talks about if there is no transparency and if there is no accountability to how that profit is getting linked to the purpose of the organization, then what happens is there is no understanding or compact between either businesses who is accountable or who should be accountable, and to its stakeholders who demands that accountability. And therefore, where should it happen? The where demands the inclusive nature of sustainability, and the inclusive nature brings about the stakeholder engagement that is very, very crucial. So therefore, can CSR or sustainability or sustainable development, can it be just thought about by a few individuals within an organization, and more so importantly within business houses? It's not so. And therefore, if you look at the entire value chain of any businesses, be it resource procurement, to the manufacturing, to the transportation of the products, or the transmission of these services, and the end of life of this product use, there are different ways in which each of the value chain and each of these stakeholders do bring in relevance to environmental, social, economic and governance topics. So with this, our discussion today, we will start with two representatives from the business. I would like Dr. Kulkarni and Mr. Chakraborty to focus on what is that way that your companies or you're representing the organization is trying to imbibe environment, economic and social and governance, include that into your core business strategy. Should we start with Mr. Chakraborty?
Firstly, the National Voluntary Guidelines, I have also added from my side 3 words, NBGC, SEE, so that people will always remember that it is the social, environmental and economic aspects that is to be seen in the NBG guidelines. Answering Aditi's query, firstly, we have a very organized setup, and sustainability issues are part of the overall business decisions and investment decisions. We see it not as a regulatory commitment or force, or we find a lot of value that is occurring to the organization when we are considering holistically all sustainability related issues during any such investment decision or business decisions. We have a targeted budget, and that is a non-lapsable budget specified by the government. And we have a board subcommittee, exclusive board subcommittee headed by an independent director. So we present our case right from policy, plan, program, budget, performance, everything is projected to them time to time, and this is documented, and beginning of next year we will be setting an MOU targets with the DP, Department of Public Enterprises, and then during the whole year we'll be working on that, and at the end of the year we have to submit those reports through our independent board subcommittee. So this is the total governance structure. Before I conclude now, I would like to tell you, did NVG pose us a problem? Not at all. Because we were already bringing out our sustainability report in the form of a reporting with third-party assurance based on GRI G3 guidelines. If you see all the 79 indicators and you have understood the whole process of undertaking sustainability activities, projects and reporting, including third-party assurance, you automatically come to know the areas of improvement. And when you embark upon a journey in the next year to improve upon that, it adds to the company's bottom line. And this year, our report will be out maybe in about a month's time or earlier, and you can see on ongcindia.com, and you will see on the last page, this is an additional thing which we are doing for the benefit of industry as a whole, that this is what is the requirement as per NVG, and this is how we have addressed it in our current sustainability report at such and such page, and this is the requirement of NVG at such and such para. So one short table will give you that level of confidence if you are already doing earlier, that you are not offline, you are very much there. So I would say that adding value to the organization, having part of the business decision process, putting in place your reporting, which of course takes a couple of years to stabilize, is an ongoing and continuous exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chakravarti, for bringing up these points about board inclusion. I think that's the topmost decision-making body in the organization. You also brought in the point that this is really a journey. It's not an end to the means. And I think this is most important for all of us to understand that this journey will have milestones. And I think the reporting helps you look at those milestones and review it every year. But now, ask Dr. Kulkarni to share your experience from the organization.
As my present organization is considered, Shapoorji Pallonji Group, we are not doing sustainability reporting, and we may not be doing it for coming 5 years or so. And reason for this is something I can give a lot of example. Lata Mangeshkar will not give the music examinations to qualify for the grade 5 or grade 6. People know it is not Lata Mangeshkar. We are Lata Mangeshkar in India. Keep it aside. My earlier organization, which was a multinational organization and stock listed company, I can say how that company would have viewed national voluntary guidelines. When it comes to anything like national voluntary guidelines or ISO systems and all that, there are two levels in the organization. Junior management and middle level management always opposes such type of thing because they think it is additional work. But when it comes to senior management, and especially for board of directors, and if you have independent director in board of directors, these things are always welcome because senior management and further board of directors have extremely limited time to look into such macroscopic details of the business. At the same time, their reputation is at the stake. If something goes wrong with the company, they feel, oh, my name is associated with that company, I don't like to get associated with anything wrong. With media and voluntary groups and with RTS support everybody becoming active, board of directors will be more and more cautious. One part of it. Second part of it, companies bill that is introduced at present in 2011, it gives a lot of powers and a lot of role to independent directors. And these independent directors will be more cautious about all such things. And therefore there is a lot of scope for organizations going for reporting based on NVG. What happens at senior management and board of directors level is, we look at credibility of people who are preparing this report. This report should be not subjective report. That means there should be absolutely clear guideline. What we are used to in top management is our accounting policies, auditing procedures, so that irrespective of whoever is doing it, result will be at least similar. At present, what I am finding in NVG is that at the most, in ISO document, what they call is management commitment, or how to frame your policy for the system conforming to ISO system. That is why the NVG stands at present, and it will not make much sense to management. Management will expect, okay, let somebody come forward, explain it, and let there be credible people who will be preparing report based on NVG so that it will stand test of all forms. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni. I will now ask the academician, Dr. Suresh Sangli, to kind of share your perspective on the National Voluntary Guidelines and how academic institutions play a very important role, because you are really nurturing the future managers of tomorrow. And therefore, how do you see these framework, not only just a global framework that we all used to be dependent on, but the national framework is now there, which is also profound and I think one of the best examples in the world. How do you see this coming to India, and what as an academic institution you are planning to do for the students and the future managers?
The way actually academic institute like NITI looks at this, we believe that 21st century is a very, very different than the previous centuries. Number one, there is a globalization that is taking place, and I think globalization is calling for universalization of business practices. So that is one very big change that is happening, that we are witnessing already. Even if you are a small company, but you possibly have to compete with the international companies even to sell a needle in the country. So that's very, very important thing. So globalization is very, very is there. We also understand that we are operating already in a what is called as a nature constrained economy. Okay, I think to me these are two major constraints. That means the 21st century posing new challenges to business organizations. They are environmental challenges and they are social challenges. So far, in the previous centuries, perhaps post 1820, when the industrialization era started actually, perhaps the business has only looked at man, machine, money and material. And most of their business strategies were essentially centering around those four M's. Perhaps is a time that you have to develop new skills, new competencies are required in order to survive in the marketplace, As I said, because we are a global economy, we possibly find it very difficult to sustain trust in the market. Okay? And therefore, organizations will have to demonstrate that they are trustworthy organizations, just like we put a lot of pressure on the government. And you will be seeing surveys after surveys that perhaps governments and large organizations are perhaps one of the least trustworthy organizations. We need to really understand why it is so. But there are two basic reasons. The distribution of the resources, perhaps we are not on an equitable basis, that is one thing in the whole economic journey. And the distribution of wealth is also not on an equitable basis. So I think these are two major reasons or the pillars of sustainable development. And as far as NVG is concerned, I think NVG touch upon human rights, it touch upon the responsibility towards the customers, it touch upon the responsibility towards the environment, it touch upon the responsibility towards the inclusive growth and the the equitable development. So what I feel that it actually calls upon developing new skills, new competency for the business organizations. I'm sure that some of these NVG guidelines perhaps can be implemented with the existing competencies that organizations already have. So it's like your Six Sigma Black Belt skills, you already have those kind of skills. But some of these objectives, if you have to implement in your organizations, you perhaps need new competency skills like acquiring new martial arts, right? So I think the organizations will have to understand there are long-term and as well as short-term objectives they have to fulfill. And every business or organization has a market and non-market objectives. It's very important that I think 21st century we have all realized that even if I have a world-class product, world-class people, world-class technology, I may not be able to do business in the marketplace simply because I have a child labor in my supply chain that's good enough for the society to boycott my products. So I think it really calls upon looking at those intangible things which perhaps businesses have not looked at so systematically as they have looked at those 4 M's. I think we, in our management curriculum, I think try to impart our students these futuristic skills which are required for organizations to really take a leadership role. Because it is not about meeting certain, compliance or basically adopting certain guidelines. It's perhaps the only way to business in the tomorrow's market, which is distinctly different than the previous market. That's how we look at it.
Thank you, Dr. Sangle. I would like to mention here that the National Voluntary Guidelines comprises of the 9 principles. And the 9 principles run across this triple bottom line aspects across environment, social and economic, including very important aspect like inclusive growth, which is very, very important for India. It also brings in the first principle of the National Voluntary Guidelines, actually asks companies to look at ethics and transparency and accountability. So this is not about just talking about philanthropy or community development work, but really the whole perspective of looking at corporate sustainability in these 3 dimensions have come out very well in the National Voluntary Guidelines. Another very important change which has happened in the National Voluntary Guidelines since its inception in 2009, that if you look at the first version of the National Voluntary Guidelines versus the 2011 one, it did not just expand and become more profound across the triple bottom line, but also brought in a very important element of reporting. And reporting why? Because the understanding was that, and as Ms. Chakrabarti also mentioned, that reporting actually helped companies to showcase its accountability. And therefore, within the company, it is about imbibing the culture of transparency. Outside the organization, it's also about communicating the right performances, policies and decisions of the company to the external world. And therefore, Dr. Kulkarni mentioned that, yes, Lata Mangeshkar is known everywhere and therefore maybe, some companies would not like to report. But what is happening globally is that many stakeholders are demanding, information. And therefore, information availability is becoming the key concentration of all these initiatives. And when information is required, it cannot be just based on one organization's decisions of what to disclose and what not to disclose. And therefore the need of a standard acceptable framework is very, very important. The National Voluntary Guidelines actually did a very smart work, and that is what I would like to mention here, that when they brought out the reporting requirement as one of the key requirements of showcasing whether organizations are imbibing National Voluntary Guidelines, it brought in reporting. The mechanism mentions that if companies like ONGC and the Tata Group and many others like the Mahindra & Mahindra and Larsen & Toubro and HCL and so on, if they have to continue reporting, if they are following international frameworks like the GRI, then they continue to do that. And that is what I think you also mentioned here. I think the alignment became very important. So with all this, we are all at the same level now. The most important, stakeholders sometimes, which are seen to be sometimes noise creators, if I may use that, sometimes seen to be problem makers, to businesses and other stakeholders, sometimes also is treated as think tank bodies and sounding boards, and therefore civil societies are also known as like the police, or the monitoring organizations for the society. So with this happening, now that we have the National Voluntary Guidelines, what are your perspectives on civil society's role in mainstreaming sustainability in India and demonstrating that to the outside world?
Thank you, Aditi. I think this world is full of misconceptions, and when I was coming here, and I was thinking maybe one of the key issues should be transparency and accountability, then I was thinking whether I should be clubbed with Arvind Kejriwal and Anna Hazare. There is always a danger of pushing certain things. I think the civil society groups are the only one who are enthusiastic about this National Voluntary Guidelines. There is nothing new in the National Voluntary Guidelines which doesn't exist under any law in India, except sustainable development and inclusive growth. Except the terms which you cannot find in the legal text. All other texts actually exist in Indian law. I would say the guidelines actually, dilute the legal compliance. Now, there's a reference to treatment with regards to customers and consumers. Look, there's a Consumer Protection Act. Each and every company, big, small, from the shopkeeper to the biggest company, have to comply with that. So there is no provision, in these 9 guidelines, which some way or the other do not find legal basis in India. And why we are enthusiastic about it? We are enthusiastic about it because I think this is a step towards legal compliance. The companies, and whether it's public sector undertaking companies or the private sector undertaking companies, have been in a way not been complying fully, and that's why there was a need to remind that these are the laws you have to comply with, and they come in the form of guidelines. And the guidelines will not work. Why guidelines will not work? Because we live in a country where, we tweak the laws to evade income tax, not to declare our profits, not to declare our contracts with particular companies. Now, if you look at a number of judgments which have recently come up from the Supreme Court, different high courts involving both the private sector and the public sector undertaking companies, you could see that there is an attempt to circumvent the laws. Now, if the guidelines are there, if you are willing to circumvent the laws, tweak the laws, how are you going to respect the guidelines? Guidelines will not be respected, they will fail at certain stage. Then we have to take the reality into account. The political reality is, why do we have the national NVCs? I think internationally speaking, there has been a series of debates at the United Nations for business and human rights as part of the UN reform, which was initiated by Kofi Annan way back in 1995. And at that point of time, Global Compact was created. And this movement has led for the adoption of guidelines on business and human rights last year at the Human Rights Council. Now a working group has been set up by the UN Human Rights Council. Whether we dislike, Human Rights Council is going to come up with a legally binding framework. And interestingly, one of the countries which sponsored this resolution for the first time was India with Norway. I mean, so there is an international movement with regard to it. Secondly, at the national level, I think the voluntary guidelines were addressed in a manner to address the demands for reservations in the private sector, which was quite strong for the last 2 years back, because the role of the government is shrinking and people are demanding reservations. And how much it can be extended to the private sector, that's a debatable issue. But the voluntary guidelines, in a way, have helped to dilute that debate. Now, if the guidelines are not implemented, obviously there will be increasing demand. And the third and final point, which I would like to say, is that we cannot escape from international responsibility. I'll give one specific example. When Talisman Inc. of Canada and Ludlin of Sweden were investing heavily in Sudan during the civil war, there was serious demand from the shareholders to the point they had to withdraw from these areas. And who went there? They basically 3 government-owned companies: Malaysia's Petronas, PetroChina, and the ONGC. Don't tell me they are not going to be held accountable at certain stage. So you will be continuously, increasingly be held accountable the way we conduct ourselves as a business group, whether private or public entity, at national level, because there is going to be increasing demand and there is going to be at the international level. And finally, I would say that the one country which has adopted a law is Philippines. Philippines has enacted corporate social responsibility law. And if Philippines has adopted it, I think India will not be very far behind. And it will not be far behind because traditionally it's the Americans and the Western countries which oppose any kind of linkages between human rights and business. So it's in our interest to do it, and we have to do it. And that's why we see as a positive thing, simply because the guidelines at a certain stage will lead to binding legal framework, which will require backing by third parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandma, for bringing out such comprehensive points and bringing out this important element that no matter whether there is a framework or no framework, or whether we are only operating nationally, our impacts are going to expand, and someday there will be international repercussions. Someday it will move beyond just regulatory framework, and it will all depend on the conviction and the commitment of the organizations that should be there from the very beginning. And therefore, I think most importantly, we do understand that there has to be this rolling out of these NVGs. Maybe the matured organizations can take it up in their own stride, because they're exposed to different kind of forums, debates, dialogues, and capacity building is inherent. There's a budget, as Mr. Chakraborty mentioned. So all these resources, both financial and sometimes human, are sometimes available to these large matured companies. But we have to also look at, how do these middle level, the sector which is very, very growing and fast, also the small and medium enterprises can also come in. But before we take up this aspect of our discussion, I would now like to ask, Betsy, that from your experience of, advisory, how do you see the National Voluntary Guidelines really getting implemented? Because your organization will be the one to actually help and handhold, companies to take it forward. And also bring it to the point that it is not just about the lip service, that we are imbibing NVGs, but there has to be some credibility attached to that imbibing and implementation of NVGs, which is very important.
The challenges we see as we talk to the private sector regularly, they're extremely reticent about, especially the NVGs. Just recently, a couple of days ago, I spoke about the largest infrastructure companies in the country, and they said, we don't think it's important to be here at a session like this. We're not listed. And secondly, we're not in the top 100 listed companies, so SEBI's mandate doesn't really apply to us. And then the second point I said is, what about the NVGs? Because it's a voluntary guideline. It would just help you grow your business in a more sustainable manner. It helps you kind of invest in a more sound, secure environment for yourself. And I think that's precisely what the NVGs want, or that is what the government wants when it talks about the NVGs. Because it's saying, can we create an environment which is secure, sound, Can it be more open, more rule-based, more transparent? Because then your issues of capital, cost of capital, availability, all this becomes easier because it's more transparent and so much more easily acceptable to the outside world and the external world. They said, no, we don't think it's important, we don't want to comply. So I think here then the challenge, as we've seen it when we talk to companies which are not yet on board, when it comes to sustainability reporting, when it comes to even a carbon disclosure, is one is the complication. I think it's the education levels. They really need to understand as to what extent do I need to invest in a process like this. But also then to realize that such an investment could actually lead to a very, very positive outcome because it's minimizing your risks, investing, but then minimizing costs in the long run. And then over time, as companies realize the benefits of this, what you're actually looking at is creation of innovative products, technology services, which are possibly more green, low footprint, and therefore you're enabling creating an environment which creates positive rollout for the companies themselves and in areas of sustainability. So that's the way we've seen it. So I think the challenge here, as we always see it, is convincing corporations that this is an important thing to do. And it's important because you will benefit. And as a corporate, a corporation's role is to create solutions. And I think they know best how to do it. It's to engage with them, create a formal process of making them aware, and helping them put into place a system that makes it easier. And that's where I leave it at this stage.
I think, Betsy, very important points here that when we are looking at sustainability and business responsibility across the three dimensions along with governance to be implemented, one is that are these frameworks making them more smart, or are these enabling organizations to imbibe these frameworks in a smart and efficient manner, or are they leading to more complications and more investments of resources? And therefore I think, and as an advisory organization, your role is really important to find out that bit of the puzzle, how to convey the National Voluntary Guidelines or any other framework to showcase business responsibility in a smart and efficient manner. The question also around Rio, as I am being told by many institutions here, when it discussed about sustainability, business responsibility and reporting, especially the government of India actually put up this very important point about reporting leading to cost, and therefore can reporting system become more simple. The very easy step is to say that, can you make reporting simple and therefore the cost comes down? Actually, it is not so. When you want to make something very simple and crisp, I think the cost can go up. For example, if you need a report which is very comprehensive, very effective, and very easy to understand, you need to hire a very good professional to help you, right? Or you develop the capacity within the organization to make it so focused that everybody understands, versus a report which could be very bulky and with number of parameters and without any understanding. Therefore, this point about efficiency and cost reduction to imbibe this kind of framework is also a very important point. But a larger point actually looms around us is, how do we roll out the capacity building? And which are those institutions which should be on board? For example, in a business organization, if the businesses are creating or preparing sustainability reports, the question which comes back to me and GRI is that who is really reading the report? Because we don't get any feedback. And the question which goes back to the stakeholders is that the feedback does not come because the capacity to understand the sustainability reports and the implication of this disclosure is not always there. And therefore, I would like to actually take this session into the next set of issues, because we heard all the panelists from their perspectives, is that what are these two things on capacity building, number one, that you need to do within? What do you need to do as part of the capacity building for the stakeholders who are seen to be outside the organizations but has a large impact on the operational decisions of the organization.
NBG is it a reporting system or is it meant for continual improvement? What organizations and companies will prefer if these guidelines help in continual improvement? Now, it follows half of the ISO type of system. That means it talks of policy, it talks of risk assessment, prioritization. It stops there. It doesn't talk of improvement programs and management reporting and further action plan. So somehow one has to build into it. When you go to detailing of it, I can give again further from the audit. In private sector, audit which is done is called financial audit, and in government sector it is performance audit. Next level, even for private sector, through NBG, should be performance audit. Where are we lacking? Board is interested in knowing. So we need to elevate the whole thing, and that will require capacity building of capable people. For example, in courts, in front of benches, when senior advocate stands, it is expected that senior advocates, when make statement, it has some weight. Do we have that sort of capacity among the consultants and people who are going to prepare reports for us, that my management will take their qualifiers so seriously? So that sort of capacity building. As far as organization is considered, instead of building capacity inside, we would prefer credible people outside, third-party auditors who can come back and tell us where we are lacking, because my low-level staff is there, my senior management is there. I want somebody to inspect and come back and tell what are the areas of improvement. So capacity building for translating this document for organizational improvement, this is a priority area for me.
I think the internal review and reflecting opportunity is equally important than just to communicate it to the external stakeholders. Mr. Chakma.
Just I think I completely agree with what Dr. Kulkarni had said. I think one of the areas which require further elaboration are the guidelines themselves. The way at the moment the guidelines are explained by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, that's not the correct explanation. Violations sometimes, whether it's environmental laws or criminal laws or civil laws, are actually offences in different ways. So I think the first thing which has to be done is to explain the NBGs themselves in a manner which people can easily understand at the level where they should be tackled with. Now if you make another saral form, I mean so saral that nobody can fill it up, a common man cannot fill it up, then there is a problem with it. So I think the first thing which is required is, what do we mean by each clause of these 9 principles? That is missing from what appeared at the moment in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, that 20, 30, 56-page document. It doesn't exist. So that's the first priority.
I think we see that each one of us in our own capacity as representing different organizations, maybe from the civil society, the not-for-profit organizations or standard-setting bodies like us, or the advisory or the academicians, and businesses themselves take up this mentoring role in a way, to contribute more to the understanding of all these 9 principles and their implications on businesses is the first key step that one has to, take up. I would ask Mr. Chakraborty also, because ONGC I know has a lot to invest on capacity.
Before I answer the issues on capacity building, I have my certain personal views on NBG and reporting. I will cover that in a minute before I go there. For any civilized society, we must have certain set of guidelines. And the development of guidelines follows a transparent process. And the same process was adopted by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs or Department of Public Enterprises for this. It is the group or the task force which works on the document, and then it is given to the public review, inviting comments. Those comments are incorporated and again it is put up to on the website. And finally, it goes to the legal ministry and finally it has the stamp of the law. to the parliament and all those things. So this whole process of development of guidelines is a very holistic and transparent one. But for that matter, one should not say that this is once for all exercise. No. Once the guidelines are in place, this is uniformly applicable to all. We start using this, and as experience is accumulated, these are further changed or developed more. So therefore, per se, I feel the national voluntary guidelines, they are quite adequate in content and with adequate examples after each principle to make the reader understand that what is the content and with the examples. Then the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has already put up a format for business responsibility reporting, how you are going to report. For that, format is already there. And the basis of this is NBG. So until and unless you get into the game, you cannot know how good or bad you are. But only when you are in it, with passage of time, you will develop the expertise, the confidence, and this is how the development process takes place. So I would compliment the Ministry of Corporate Affairs to do a very good exercise on this front. Now coming back to the capacity building, as I mentioned that we are already having an elaborate sustainability reporting. For us, it's not at all a cause of worry or surprise or anything, because we are doing much more than that. We have an Apex board committee, then my group reporting directly to the board. Then we have about 400 installations covered in the nook and corner of the country. It's a huge, huge job. And at each work center, what we call as the asset or basin, we have identified officers to whom we have redesignated them as Sustainable Development Officers, SDOs. They are currently about 69 or 70 number. We do 2 programs for them yearly. Number 1, we conduct a 2-day test being undertaken by them. There the opportunity is given to each and every asset and basin to come and give the presentation, so that learning is from one another. It is not to be imported from outside. And during that exercise, we have only done 1 exercise so far, but in coming year, we will be calling at least 2 or 3 external experts also. Because once I hear my 60 guys, maybe that I miss out some point. But if I have Dr. Rambabu or Aditi in the panel, they will have their independent focus point. And after hearing all the presentations, they will come out the areas of strengths and weaknesses and opportunities. So we have on the ground level people who we bring it for the review and workshops, and at our level we do what we call as SRE window program, that is stakeholder engagement, wide interactive dialogue organization wide, where me and my team, we address the senior managers and top managers and middle level managers, that I do. And at the lower level, it is these SDOs, and at the corporate level, we have the board committee. So you have to attack the top, at the peer, and the bottom. And sustainability is a journey, as Aditi has said. It is not one-stop business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chakravarti. Mrs. Sangle, would you like to kind of share your perspective on not only the large companies, as Mr. Chakravarti described, but also to bring in the SMEs and their awareness, as Ms. Chakma mentioned, the real understanding about the implication of these 9 principles, which is really the first step that we all need to achieve?
I think first thing I would say that we're talking about transparency. Transparency is basically, it's only a one-way communication. Okay? I think if you really want reporting to be more meaningful and more participative, we have to perhaps take it further, creating transactiveness. That means allowing stakeholders also to involve perhaps in the dialogue at the beginning itself, in the beginning stage. Then only perhaps transparency will lead to transactiveness, and transactiveness leads to transformation of the organizations. I think that's the first principle that should be kept in mind. Second thing, whether large companies or small companies, we need to create a business context of these NVG guidelines, because then perhaps each and every function understand their role in implementing NVGs.
Is organization subscribing to that ideology or not? If you have understood the sustainability risks, the sustainability issues, and you are convinced it gives tremendous economic value to the organization, then only you will start working on different projects and activities, and the results of that is going to be reported. The fundamental and basic thing is sustainable development. I'm sorry, I had to make it too clear. That's all. Thank you.
So it's really about, I think what Mr. Chakravarti is mentioning here is, are we clear about our purpose? And if we are clear about our purpose, we can actually use any of the framework to showcase and demonstrate our accountability to that purpose. The second question, yes, I'll come to you.
It is not a question, this is a suggestion. Every limited company, as per the company law, has to publish quarterly reports, financial reports in public domain. Along with that, responsible business practices has to be also declared quarterly. If somebody is not doing for 6 months, very unlikely in the next 6 months. So that let's go for manipulations. And it is a public domain, let publicly see, because nowadays all the balance sheets are read publicly, investors read publicly. If the responsible practices are not mentioned, a company who doesn't have a CSR department, a company who doesn't have such a department and reporting CSR initiatives at the end of the year, I think this is not very the same. CSR cannot be a part of marketing application. The need is seen by the taste of eating is in when you eat the food, you understand. So let it be the physical seen as every quarter by quarter, what are the practices to be seen in public domain, either to website or to the media.
Get your point about making it more regular and frequent, and therefore we don't kind of wait at the end of the year to have an annual sustainability report. But there have been many suggestions, not only just to come up with a holistic sustainability report, not only for 1 year, but there are organizations who are doing it every 2 years, So this is a far-fetched thing. What you are mentioning here, I guess, is more about putting in a system, to institutionalize a system, and therefore it is not about just waiting for the last 3 months of the year to join together and come up with a sustainability report, which is really about a process issue. And I think Mr. Chakravarti mentioned right in the beginning that you can't just wait for that yearly kind of event to happen for a report. It has to be a journey and a process which needs structure, systems, roles and responsibilities and resources allocated.
You are producing about 8,000 tons of waste every day. My using the word waste is not correct. This waste is not a waste. This waste is a waste because we are unable to extract value out of it. The moment I segregate the organic from the inorganic and I start using the waste for power generation, you will not have an iota of waste. Example is the whole of Sweden. In Sweden they don't have 1 gram of waste lying in the country. And to make their municipal plants work, have you ever heard people are importing waste? Sweden is importing waste from Norway so that their plants generate power. I wish India had been near Sweden. Our problem would have been solved. Question lies, why I gave this example, It is question of mindset. Sustainable development is the core business issue whenever you are taking the decision. So this is what was my point of view, that we are making good amount of benefits which we have not translated unfortunately in rupees. We don't intend to, because it is our policy, it is our vision, and it is our journey that will continue. What else I have to refer to? This is one thing you had said. You said another point. Cost of reporting. Firstly, there is a misnomer. You have to have this thick report, because everybody says, "Arey, my report is only of 10 pages. The other ITC I saw this thick, some 112 pages." Well, it is a misnomer. You can as well bring out only 7-page or 6-page report. What matters is what you are reporting, and whether you are following a format or guidelines, no matter whether you are doing EPICA or you are doing GRI or you are doing the NBG, no matter what you are doing, if you are on the journey, you can easily make n number of reporting. If you are not doing any, you can't report on any. I hope I have made this point clear. Initially, you require hand-holding. The consultants they can render this help to you as low as 1.5 lakh or 2 lakhs or maybe 2.5 lakhs. But you need to have 1, 2, 3, 4 people initially in the organization dedicated for this purpose. They will not only be doing the reporting part. I have a department with 22 people, but they are doing fugitive emissions, reporting, carbon capture and information, then sustainable water management. There are a large number of projects. So the whole sustainable development group is working exclusively for the organization. And in addition, we do public service, as I am doing now, courtesy Dr. Ram Babu. This is one of our mandates, that we have to do an extensive public service. So that's why you will find me occasionally speaker. Yesterday I was with Terry in Lavasa doing the same exercise. This weekend I will be doing with somebody else. This is in addition to our service that we impart to the society at large, at no cost, for your information.
Thank you, Mr. Chakravarti. To respond to your question, I think frankly, GRI has not done a research to look at which companies used how much of financial resources to complete a report. I think that's a very good suggestion. Maybe Dr. Ram Babu, you can go back to GIZ and maybe inform them that this is one of the suggestions which has come. It will be excellent to have these kind of ideas published. To make, what is the real cost of getting consultants, or maybe putting capacity building within the team of the organization, or maybe, using communication specialists to come up with a report.
Many organizations, they drop in our office, they contact us, fix up time, and we give them adequate time, make them understand, and we do not charge anything. Besides, we are very courteous in offering tea, coffee, and snacks.
Aditi,
Okay.
can I just make a comment? Okay, majority of the times, while costs are easy to get, okay, one is the process cost, very difficult, internal cost. Consultant cost is addition, but the benefit is a larger challenge.
Exactly.
For example, I remember way back, one chemical company which produces fertilizers. Okay, when we were doing this strategy to begin the sustainability report way back in 2001, we asked them a question that the very fact that you are in a fertilizer business, you are not in a sustainable business. No matter what you do, this business will never be sustainable. So upfront the strategy needs to be changed.
Understanding the sustainability issues and its implications to the business and the stakeholders, distilling them, and then getting the data online, and therefore coming up with a report. With that, I think we would like to hear from Mr. Chakma, your perspective.
I think transparency by the company helps. As I had mentioned, we live in an age where we are part of the global community. in most big companies, it's not only Indians, also the foreigners investing. You won't believe, I don't want to mention the name of the company, one of the largest steelmaking companies of this country. We get queries from consultancy firms in Sweden whether this company is involved in allegedly implicating some activities opposing it. Because what we report will actually determine their advice to their investors. We charge
labor issues, whether it's human rights, whether it's access to energy, water, environmental degradation. It covers all these. We may say that these roles are largely should be led by governments, and really what does the private sector have to do and how much can it impact? But this is precisely what the NVGs try to address. It is saying, are you looking at all these aspects of your business? How much of this is within your sphere of influence? And how much can you change, address, monitor, and finally report? And I think that is where we need to keep in mind that private corporations, private companies, the public sector, the MSMEs all have a role to play. And in that sense, we must give it its due place and take this forward.
So thank you, Betsy, and thank you, all the other panelists. Dr. Kulkarni, you mentioned about how your company is, going ahead. You brought in very important points about the national and international implications of sustainability and what civil societies should be doing. Mr. Chakravarti, as always, is very, very firmly grounded on looking at the real achievement of sustainable development. Professor Sangle actually brought about the role of the academicians to look at how they would go forward and what the future generations and the potential managers of tomorrow should be looking at. Betsy, you shared a very important point which I really like, is about how do we mainstream sustainability not only through consultants and advisory groups, but really the role of the sectoral and the industry associations and chambers, and also to bring about a change in the mindset. I would also like to, if I reflect on this 1.5 hours, I see that very smoothly we all transitioned ourselves to the discussion from the National Voluntary Guidelines talking about these 9 principles to reporting. And therefore we all see that reporting really is the key way in which we would like to understand how much the National Voluntary Guidelines are going to be implemented. So therefore, I think for the rolling out of the National Voluntary Guidelines, which could be used by more and more different kinds of sectors and different scale of operations of businesses, we need to see how reporting can be more effective. To add to your question, I think one of the ways that this reporting can be also taken up by small and medium enterprises, and GRI has been doing that, is to not look at the set of indicators and come up with an A-level report. The aspiration of this A-level report, looking at a bulky report versus a small comprehensive but giving out material information, is the key to making it less costly. So with that, I would close the session, and Dr. Rambabu, would you like to say a few words, please? Thank you to all panelists. Thank you so much.